Thank you. Good morning, members, and welcome to the March meeting of the Education and Learning Committee. I hope we're all keeping well. Tracy, could we have the severant and apologies?
Morning, Chair. We've got 21 members present. I have apologies from Councillor Dempster and Sam Scobie. Not present at the start is Councillor Willie Scobie. Councillor Tate, I think, may have just joined. No, not yet. And sorry, we've got Councillor Thompson now as well. So 22 members present, Chair.
Thanks, Tracy. And I give my approval for the members' remote participation, and just to remind members that the committee will be live streamed, recorded and made available to the public for all viewing purposes. So do you have any declarations of interest? I'm not seeing any. Tracy?
No, nothing coming through on the chat, Chair.
Okay. So can we move to the minutes of the Education and Learning Committee of the 4th of February 2021. That starts on page 11, and that's for noting. Are we happy to note that?
Noted.
Thank you. So item 4, starting on page 19, Education Restart Update the Position Report by Director Skills Education and Learning. This paper sets out the position since the last committee and arrangements for our school's plans for reopening. The papers went to print before the Scottish Government guidance was published following the First Minister's announcement on the 2nd of March. The Director has therefore offered to give committee a verbal report with the current position. We also have John Thin and Jim Brown, heads of service, available to answer members' questions on the content of the paper. Director?
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, members. Yes, on Monday, all our primary age children returned to full-time face-to-face learning. So over 10,000 children in our 98 primary schools came back to our buildings, and we're delighted to have our pupils and staff back in school. And I'm sure many parents will be pleased to wave their children back to class, and that children will be excited to see their friends and teachers again. The phased return of secondary schools is also underway. It's a slow but steady start for the 2 weeks until Easter. We're prioritising senior phase pupils as they prepare for their national qualifications, but our S1 to S3 pupils have been returning this week, reconnecting with teachers, familiarising themselves with health and safety routines, and this includes the regular lateral flow testing. So the report in front of you today sets out the national and local position, and as Chair mentioned, the report was written prior to 2 announcements that have subsequently been made. The First Minister stated on Tuesday that we hope all children will be back in school full-time from the 12th of April. We expect further guidance on this next week, which I know is close to the end of term, but as soon as I have the government's position, I will share this with parents. I would like to thank all pupils, parents and staff for continuing to stick to the rules, looking out for each other and working with us to make remote learning work as well as it has. It's been a long term. We closed to most of our pupils on the 18th of December, and today, exactly 3 months on, I'm very proud of what our staff have achieved. While we are all pleased to be back in school, I know that for some school communities, they're dealing with sadness and loss. Many families across Dumfries and Galloway have been affected by loss in the past year, and our school families have too. We're a people's service, and education is a community where we feel these losses keenly. Our thoughts are with the family of those who will not be coming back to school next term. So, members, it's a detailed report in front of you, and we have Jim and John to support me in answering any questions that you might like to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Members? Gail?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. And I'd like to echo as well my praise and thanks to pupils, all school staff and parents at what I know is an incredibly difficult time. And constantly moving feast as well. And I cannot praise the staff enough. I know one deputy head teacher who's now on the 17th iteration of a timetable, and I just can't even imagine what they're doing. But it's just on that, if you could maybe just give us a bit of an overview where we're at with timetabling, particularly for blended learning and for pupils that have been coming in for practical subjects, some of the transport and logistical challenges around that. It's just assurances around pupils maybe having one full day instead of 2 split days, and then the transport element that supports that, and maybe just a wee bit of an update on the restart costs and additional funding that I think has probably flowed through since the February report. I know that there was an additional 70 million in total, 35 million for up to December, and then 35 million following through. And is that going to be sufficient to cover the additional costs that we're incurring? Thank you.
Thank you. John, can you take I know you were working closely with our secondary heads in negotiating with our trade unions the model of return to school. Can I pass to you, please?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Councillor McGregor. Yeah, so as Gillian has outlined, the full return for the primary youngsters and the partial return over this week and next for the secondary youngsters was very much based on an agreement and an agreed set of principles with our schools, but which was based on the doability, if you like, of getting the young people back. And clearly for a region like Dumfries and Galloway, that was very much based on the how and based on the transport arrangements. So we're very much involved with our partner services with school transport, and we built the model from that to try and provide that equity of approach across our schools, our secondary schools. The model within that was very much focused on a health and well-being, in particular for our youngest learners in our secondary schools, to ensure that they were reconnecting, re-engaging with our schools and re-engaging with their teachers, and probably most importantly for them, re-engaging with their friends. So the models that were built were very much at a devolved and localised level within the parameters that we would expect each of the S1s, S2s and S3s to have a full day of learning each week, and for the S4 to S6s to have the flexibility within the other 2 days to deliver some practical classes as part of that, although some practical classes would in fact run for the full week. The continuation of remote learning for the young people who are continue to learn at home, and continuing with a slight increase for secondary schools in terms of provision for childcare, because clearly with our primary staff going back and an increased number of secondary staff, we also had a slight increase in the number of children who required childcare for these 2 weeks. So hopefully that gives a bit of a background to the return and the sort of logistics and trying to plan for that, but trying to provide for an approach that was as equitable across Dumfries and Galloway as possibly could make it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just one follow-up question. You dealt with a case for me recently, and I'm very grateful for a positive outcome with that. But can we ensure that no pupils or families are in any financial detriment through having to use service buses instead of school buses? I know that there's additional funding in there for school transport, and I just want to be assured that we don't have any family having to pay £4.50 for a single trip in very tight household financial times.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you, and appreciate you raising that one, because that was one of the unintended consequences, I suppose, probably before the 2 week return, but certainly as part of that return to the practical classes and the challenges with regards to some people, young people coming in during the school day rather than at the bookends of the school day from the start or the end of the school day. So yeah, absolutely, picking up that as an individual case, but clearly if there are any other instances of that, we would want to make sure that those families weren't disadvantaged.
Okay, Gail. Right, so I've got, sorry.
I'm saying the finance.
So I think in the report, yes, we are receiving, it's quite a complex picture for the finance that's coming in. It's coming in with quite specific criteria around it, and quite often the criteria takes some time before it is published following the announcement. So we have not included any detail in this report regarding the finance, because there's not been any additional cost to add to the position set out in the budget monitoring reported to the committee on the 4th of February. If it's helpful, members, we can set out a financial plan as we move forward with reference to the various tranches of that's certainly been helpful for us in the past, where we've seen where the funding has been announced, where it has been targeted, and how we have then used the flexibility we have in order to make sure it's put to best effect.
Yeah, I think that would be useful, Gillian, just so people are aware of what's happening. So I've got Jim McComb and David McKee. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Could someone provide the rationale behind the August start for secondary schools?
Jim, are you happy to take that question? I know it was certainly a point of debate with secondary head teachers. I'll hand over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Gillian. I'm more than happy. Thank you, Councillor McComb. Yes, the SQA process this year has obviously been a very movable feast, and what we have finally found out recently is that the date of the 25th of June is the final date for submission of our grades for young people. That was given to us by the SQA in order to ensure that we have got the maximum learning available, the time for learning available for senior phase pupils in this particular cohort. What we have to do in order to get that information to the SQA is carry out a series of assessments in schools in order to gather the evidence to make confident grades, but also we have to do a process of moderation and quality assurance to make sure that the grades are standardised across the piece within Dumfries and Galloway, but also that we're going to do a piece of work linking to other local authorities to ensure that the grades we give are aligned in quality to the grades other authorities give. Now, what that does is it means that we are in a very good place with the local authority in terms of the standard that we are using. In order to do that, we said to secondary head teachers that it would be beneficial not to start early to ensure that every young person in the senior phase has got the maximum time available to them. Now, what of course that will mean is that some young people will finish early, but what can happen in class is even if you do finish your assessments that bit early, there's no reason why you shouldn't progress to the next level of learning. And indeed, that's exactly what happens in classes all through the year, in all year groups, that young people learn at the level of their own ability. What we have said, finally, Councillor McComb, is that if there are very specific local cases within a given secondary school, that a head teacher who knows their own young people very well, that they believe they can still meet the need for producing the evidence for this year's cohort this year before 25th June. If they can do that and start the timetable that wee bit earlier, well, that's down to a local decision. But my very strong advice to head teachers was let's use the 25th of June as a starting position, and if you then feel that you are confident that no young person will be adversely affected by an early start, and that you've made consideration to other logistical factors such as transport, and you've had a good consultation with your community, well then absolutely you can have a local arrangement for the change of timetable. Is that clear? Yeah.
You're saying, Jim, there is a degree of flexibility here.
Thank you, Councillor McComb. You put it in a very short sentence when I took a long time, but that's exactly what I'm saying. There is flexibility. We want to ensure that at a local level, head teachers do have a level of empowerment to meet the local needs of their school community. Absolutely.
Thank you. And is it the case that the dates for submission for assessment purposes have been moved back this year?
That's correct. They've been moved to the 25th of June, which of course means that that's very much the end of our term, and we have got dates where we are going to do our local authority moderation process, and then also the process where we link with other authorities to give that confidence in the data we will send off at the latest by the 20th of June.
Thank you very much, Jim.
I do think it's important we do have equity for all our pupils in terms of achieving what they're capable of. Okay, so David McKee.
Just a quickie for John. You were on about consultation with the childcare sector, John. I take it you consult with the private providers as well to ensure that they can work with you.
Sorry, Councillor McKee. Maybe I didn't explain that very well. What I was suggesting was that the schools themselves, we have been providing, as you know, childcare for essential key workers over the piece, and that just simply extended for us into the next phase, if you like, into these last 2 weeks of the term, because of the need that there would be more staff within schools going back to work, so therefore their children required essential childcare. So it's just that extension of that essential childcare for key worker families, if you like, and also the continuation of the vulnerable children's, those children are identified as vulnerable anyway, for their childcare. That's really what I was referring to when I was discussing that one.
That's fine. Thanks very much.
Thanks, John. I don't have anyone else looking to speak, so can we move to the recommendations? Can we note 2.1?
Noted.
Yep. And note 2.2, the specific local responsibilities.
Noted.
And,
Noted.
Okay, and agree 2.3, the arrangements for Easter school provision is set out in paragraph 3.17.
Noted. Agreed.
Right, and 2.4, agree. 2.4, agree that secondary school timetables for sessions 21-22 start at the beginning of the term in August 2021, as set out in paragraph 3.22, but also noting the local flexibility for individual schools.
Agreed. Agreed.
Okay, members, thank you. So if we can move on to agenda item 5 on page 33, the Director's 6-month assessment of education, learning, business plan and performance. Gillian, do you want to say something with regard to this?
Thank you, Chair. It is the Service Committee have not normally received 6-month performance reports this cycle, but we felt it was helpful for members that we had an opportunity to review the attainment statistics from the 2020 session before we got too far into the 21 year. So this report, there is a number of data points that are not available in the 6-month reports, but that's normal at this point. But we thought it was helpful to present the review of 2020, and we have Alistair Young and Jim Brown here to answer any specific questions you might have.
Thanks, Gillian. So, members, any questions? Stephen Thompson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was actually on, I think it was in 3.22, where it's talking about musical instruction. I think we were sort of expecting a report to come back to this committee to look at how we would transform the service, if you like, across the region. And I think in the last item, Chair, when you said, you know, the important thing is equity for all our pupils in terms of what they are capable of, which is, I think, you know, the right sort of value to have. So it's really just how, what will we sort of expect to see in that report, given obviously we've been waiting a couple of years for this, to be fair, in terms of transforming musical instruction, and it's maybe timely because a lot of parents and children will have had the email from the council about inviting them to sign up to new instrumental instruction classes. So I suppose the question is, when will we see that report, and will it take on board all the sort of elements we have learned, I suppose, from virtual working, or how we deal with the regional equity, if you like, in terms of offering that.
It falls within this falls within Jim Brown's remit. So, Jim, do you want to respond?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Lever. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Absolutely right. There was an intention to come to this committee to describe the position of the musical service and also a vision, a strategy moving forward. As a result of factors, particularly COVID, the work that was contingent upon, in other words, the full audit of all partners within the music landscape had not taken place. And what I felt was that in order to get a full sense of the voice from the voice and the impact, particularly of the instrumental music service, the youth music initiative, and then music also in primary, broad general and senior phase, as well as the way all of those parts that are in our control, in our gift, but the way those parts link with the wider musical community, that piece of work had not yet delivered the consultation. As such, I felt that what I could have done was given you a half report, which wouldn't have really set out exactly where we were and where we need to go. I've discussed with Councillor Lever, and I've given an absolute assurance that this report will be given in the next committee, and I'll speak to it in June.
Stephen?
Great. Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Chair. That's reassuring. I'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, so I've got Julie Irvin.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a couple of comments on it. There's, within the appendices, there's talk of partnering all schools with their local library and to give every child library membership. Now, I know with COVID that'll have been delayed, but there's a bit of an issue with that because a lot of the smaller libraries have restricted hours, and I'm just wondering how we're going to access those libraries, or is there going to be availability once we reopen for parents to be able to access the library with their children, or for senior phase pupils even to use them for study bases after school hours?
Gillian?
I can certainly take that, Julie, and certainly if it's something that's of interest, the Literacy Strategy Group has been working with that, so we can certainly take that off table with the trade union representatives if they're interested in that work. It was a council priority, it was in the council plan, and we've been working with our community partners to ensure that all children have got access to library, but it doesn't have to be a physical walking in through the door access to library, but access to some of the electronic and the wonderful electronic e-book resources that they have. So I'm happy to give the trade unions an update on the work of the Literacy Strategy Group to that end. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, that would be great.
Don't see anyone else wanting to come in to speak. So in that case, can we move to the recommendations? 2.1, I think we reviewed the 6-month summary performance. Happy with that? Agreed. Okay. We've scrutinised the exception report, or at least it's covered in the report. I think everyone's happy with that. Agreed. And 2.3, reviewed the educational attainment information. Okay. Thanks, members. So if we move on to item 6 on page 85, Dumfries Learning Town Phase 2 update. Members will recall that on the 4th of March this year, full council agreed the capital investment strategy inclusiveness of the recommendation made by Education Learning Committee at its meeting the 4th of February 2021 for the full allocation of 73.975 million to deliver DLT Phase 2. This paper highlights the progress made to date around the current work streams and as for members' agreement to progress the required roles within the programme management structure through to recruitment, and that the recommended procurement route for delivery of Dumfries High School is shared with members in May. And we have Lauren Foss to answer questions on the report. Is there anything you want to add to it, Lauren?
Thanks. I think the only thing I would add at this stage is that we've had further contact with the Scottish Future Trust around how the funding model for Dumfries High School will look and operate into the future. They're working through the various local authorities that have a project secured through this phase of funding, and it's hopeful that we'll have the clarity around just precisely how the conditions are applied when the funding comes down, how all the detail works within there within the next couple of months. So hopefully that will align with the opportunity to have the additional positions within the team established, so that allows the project to really gather steam and apace at that point. And happy to take any questions on the paper.
Thanks, Lauren. Members, any questions? I'm not seeing any, so in that case, can we move to the recommendations? Can we note 2.1? Oh, sorry, there's a hand up somewhere.
Sorry, Jim McComb, Chair.
Oh, sorry. Jim?
Sorry about that, Chair. The posts which are listed in 3.4, are they for the duration of the project?
In simple terms, yes. The positions in the list, there are some that have got an asterisk beside them. They will play a role within the project for the full duration from start to completion, handover, and the post-occupancy evaluation. Other elements within there, for example, the IT lead, facility management, will drop in and out as required through the process. It's likely that some of the positions in there will only be required for the creation of the project brief and the specification and getting it to the documentation where we hand it over to a contractor to deliver that project for us. So will all play a role throughout the whole lifetime of the project, but probably more heavily towards the beginning part of it, with the key personnel playing a more active role right through to the duration.
Thanks, Lauren.
Okay, Jim. Okay, so going back to the recommendations, can we 2.1, no progress at Dumfries Learning Town work stream since the last committee as set out in paragraphs 3.2 to 3.6. No. 2.2, agree the following decision of full council, the posts in addition to those already within the council, as set out in 3.7, will be progressed to recruitment.
Agreed.
And 2.3, agree to receive a report of the Education and Learning Committee in May. The details of recommendation regarding the procurement route to be adopted for these works are set out in 3.9.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thanks, Lauren. Okay, members, if we move to agenda item 7, investment in schools virtual desktop technology. This is a standing item on the agenda. Members will recall, and I know quite a few actually attended a very informative members seminar on Monday afternoon with regard to this, which was led by Susan Martin. This paper sets out the progress in the bandwidth upgrades in schools, the planning for pilot schools, and the procurement process to be used post-budget setting on 4th of March. There's an update on the digital inclusion project and also on the engagement in e-learning. And we'll have Susan to speak to it. Susan, is there anything you want to add?
Nothing to add to the report at this stage, Chair.
Thanks, Susan. Members? Oh, Rob?
Sorry, I wasn't indicating, Chair.
Oh, okay. Pauline?
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Susan. Thank you to everybody that's been helping the schools and the children get back just after Gail's points. I think it's been really, really challenging, and I really see that everyone's been doing a fantastic job speaking to teachers and pupils alike. So thank you, everyone, for that. Susan, Jim Brown alluded to the fact that children learn at a pace relevant to their own capacity. And with investment into virtual desktop technology, children will in fact be learning this way within schools, as you informed us on Monday, as from around about June. I think I'm correct with my timings there. I've had a number of parents feedback just in the last 2 days, actually, that they're really a bit concerned that as we move out of lockdown, that the more able-minded children are getting a little bit sidelined, Susan, and that's actually happened during lockdown as well. And the parents have been looking to recruit private tutors. Please maybe have your assurance that going forward, desktop technology will not simply leave our more able-bodied children to their own devices. That's really what I'm looking for today. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, team.
Susan?
Thank you, Councillor Drysdale. I know that we still have Jim as head of curriculum on the call, and he perhaps wants to pick up the learning aspects of that question. But that is absolutely not the intention. I think, as we reiterated on Monday at the members' seminar, that one of the key drivers for this investment in technology is around creating a flexible landscape that allows for young people to engage in ways that best suit their learning needs and actually create that flexibility and range of opportunity for young people. It's intended to enhance and add to, and not in any way to withdraw from or to reduce the offer that's already there in terms of catering for individual pupil needs. But if I could maybe offer Jim to answer in terms of the curriculum aspect of that.
Thank you, Susan. Chair, can I come in?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Councillor Drysdale. And we've obviously talked about it as well. The point about the digital is, and I absolutely accept your concern, your awareness of the landscape. But the point about digital is it does exactly what Susan said. It's an as well as rather than instead of. And so, for example, you know, there's huge numbers of potential applications of this. Many of which we of course don't yet know. We are operating within a very, very changeable landscape, but we are very much at the crest of the wave in terms of a local authority looking at how digital can be used. And so, for example, one of many would be the fact that in terms of equity and breadth of curriculum, we are, you know, the advanced higher hub that we are looking at, for example, will mean that a much wider range of the highest tariff courses are available to every young person in Dumfries and Galloway. So I hear your concern. I absolutely say to you, yes, this is as well as rather than instead of. We recognise absolutely the relationship between qualified teachers and young people is utterly central to high quality learning. And what we are doing is we are giving additionality in order both to broaden the curriculum offer and to ensure equity across a very large geographical area.
Thanks, Jim. So I've got John Young, Elaine Murray and David McKee. So, John?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Susan, for that presentation on Monday. It was most informative. Can I ask about the responsibilities for managing and maintaining web filters on this new system to prevent users accessing inappropriate material?
Okay, so I think Graham McAlorum is on the call from Business and Technology Solutions. Graham, would you like to take that call about filtering, please?
Yeah, certainly. The filtering associated with the virtual desktop environment is the same as the current filtering arrangement. It's really just another element of the computing environment that Dumfries and Galloway have. So anything going out or coming in will go through the same existing filters.
Okay, John.
And these filters are maintained by Dumfries and Galloway, not by Microsoft?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Elaine. Elaine, you're on mute.
I'm having problems with my mic staying on, unfortunately. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. I'm asking this on behalf of Councillor Dempster, who's not able to be here, but had expressed concern about the changes identified in 3.7 and the fact that the initial schools, which included Kellerholm Primary and Sanker Primary, were supposed to be in the first phase, and then there seemed to be some sorts of problems with the broadband update, and they're no longer able to be part of phase 1. Maybe you could explain what the problem's been and why we didn't know about this issue earlier. I think he felt that expectations had been raised within the community and then hadn't been able to be fulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. We've actually, for the Chair's information, we've actually spoken separately to Councillor Dempster on this matter to make sure that he was aware, because we knew that there would be disappointment in that particular community. I think what had happened was that the initial indications were positive, and therefore we moved on the assumption based on the information we had at that moment in time. However, as the programme has now been received, or is being received and being finalised with our contractors, that although Kellerholm may be able to move forward very quickly, Sanker cannot. And the reason Sanker cannot is simply that it needs much more of the works that are of the type of road digging and installing new cabling and new wiring, and that will take a bit longer. It's not as straightforward as had been at first indicated to us. So it is further down the programme, which just means that it cannot be part of this early phase of testing. However, as I think I've said in the report, we are intending to still take those schools that were initially indicated as a sort of phase 1A, so that they are still an early adopter and they still get that opportunity ahead of the broad rollout. It's simply been matters out with our control that have meant that that wasn't possible, and it wasn't indicated in the first round of paperwork that we received, unfortunately. So we're working with what we've got and trying to make the best of it as best we can, really.
Thank you.
Susan. Okay, then. Okay, so I've got David McKean, Julie Irvine, Jim McComb and Stephen Thompson. David?
I think my question has been partly answered by Graham. Actually, it was the security of the systems that they kind of get scrabbled up by the outside people who like to do these things. Just wonder that, I think, as I say, I think Graham touched on that, but if you could just give us an assurance, that'd be fine. Thank you.
Graham?
Yes, certainly. We have looked very, very closely at the security associated with the virtual desktop environment and compared it against the NCSC, that's the National Security Cyber Centre, compliance rules in the Scottish Government cyber security plus criteria, and it certainly meets them without any issue. So I think the Microsoft environment that we're going to use is extremely secure.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Okay, David. Okay, so Julie Irvine.
Thank you, Chair. It was a question about 3.10, that there's currently a waiting list of 70 families. I wasn't sure if that is still the case or if stock has actually come in and that number has changed.
Unfortunately not at the moment. Stock worldwide is at a premium and we have not yet been able to take a further delivery. We are anticipating that being before the end of April, and we're following those up on a regular basis. Obviously timelines haven't quite worked out and a lot of young people are back in school, particularly our primaries. Nonetheless, we'll still look to support those families, because if there's a need there, that's what that funding is for. So we'll be looking to do that as soon as we can get delivery of stock.
Thanks, Susan.
That's lovely, thank you.
Okay, Jim. Okay, so I've got Jim McComb and then Stephen Thompson. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Julie has just asked the question I was intending to ask in relation to 310.
Okay, Jim.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
Okay, Stephen?
Yeah, thanks again, Chair. It was actually just on following on from the member seminar, the webinar, in terms of, like, I suppose, cascading the updates to all ward members. Is it something that we could maybe do to sort of include those? And we receive monthly reports from our ward officers, and this is maybe a way of joining up, maybe, you know, the council's information services, so that at a ward level, where the local schools that are likely to be benefiting from this rollout, as and when they benefit, just to sort of keep everybody on the same page. Maybe that's something we could embed either as an action or as a suggestion to go forward. The other thing as well was just on the sort of concept of bring your own device. And I know Graham probably knows I'm a great fan of this, but is there something there about, as effectively we're saying that in a school environment, anyone could access with any device from their home and get their emails, etc., through the likes of Cloud and Outlook and whatnot. Is that something we can reasonably then extend across the council, given what we've learned in the last year of COVID restrictions and digital entrepreneurship, if you like?
Right.
Chair, if I could take the first part of that, and
Sorry,
and absolutely give an assurance that we will link with the ward members to get that information out on a ward basis as schools are coming on to the programme, so that ward members are fully informed of where they sit within that programme. So we'll take that forward as an action from education, but I'll allow Graham to speak about the BYOD.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. BYOD, the work that we're doing with schools is in effect a pilot for a wider rollout. However, the issues are not particularly with the technology. The issues are about information management. At the moment, members have a direct connect, as it were, into the council environment, which means that it can be kept extremely secure. What we have with the virtual desktop is that we would have to move some of the functionality off the corporate network and host it separately but securely, and that involves a wee bit more forward planning. So the answer to Councillor Thompson's question is yes, it is being considered, and the best way to understand what the impact of that will be to do a review of the schools install, and once that's done, then yes, we could consider rolling that out to not only councillors but other council staff as well.
Thanks, Graham.
Thank you. It sounds like progress. Thank you, Chair.
I don't have anyone else looking to speak. I think the past year has actually obviously been quite transformative, but as I've actually shown all the opportunities which are available in terms of online working and learning. So I think it is important that we push this through as quickly as possible. It does open up a huge amount of opportunities for our young people. So can we move to the recommendations? And we 2.1 note the progress made to date in relation to the bandwidth upgrade in the primary Wi-Fi infrastructure project as detailed in paragraphs 3.3 and 3.4.
Agreed.
Can we 2.2 note the procurement process and timelines as set out in paragraph 3.5.
Noted.
And 2.3 agree the adjustment in the schools for the live test pilot to support ongoing progress in preparation for rollout in paragraphs 3.6 to 3.8 and appendix 2.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
So if we move on to agenda item 8, care experienced children and young people education update report. Members are invited to consider the latest education data for looked after children, including an update on the work of the Care Experienced Education team. This report is a follow-up to the report brought to committee in 2020, which outlined the development of the Care Experienced Education team from the Scottish Attainment Challenge funding, explained some of the key challenges that exist, and outlined approaches being taken to address the challenges. This report summarises the current data in relation to looked after children within education, specific data related to the work of the Care Experienced Education team, the priority areas for action, and describes proposals for the future. And we have Linda, is it? And Stephen to speak to it. Linda Bigger and Stephen Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members.
Is there anything you want to add to the report?
Yes, I would just like to add that although the focus of this agenda item today is specifically about looked after young people, it's important to note that the work we're taking forward sits within a wider context, which includes the ASN transformation agenda, which you're hearing more about today, the Better Relationships, Better Learning framework, which has been developed in partnership with local head teachers, and the work of the Mental Health in Schools group, which is looking at developing mental health pathways, whole school approaches, and of course the work on the school counselling project in tandem with youth work. Against this backdrop, the improvement priorities of the multi-agency looked after raising attainment group continue, and we just want to highlight within this plan there is a significant emphasis on building capacity, which includes the establishment of an advocates group of senior education staff, a needs analysis within education to identify gaps in skills and knowledge, and improved engagement with looked after young people to identify ways in which support can better meet their needs. We're happy to provide further information and to take any questions on any aspect of our report.
Thanks, Linda. I've got David McKee. David?
Thanks, Chair. I'm sorry, folks, but I find this very depressing reading. These a number of looked after children you've got in schools and whatnot, and it must be very difficult for the teachers and for the people that work directly with them. And I'm sure that they're doing a tremendous job, and I should thank them very much for that. I notice there's been a reduction in exclusions, primary and secondary. And I don't suppose there's an overall area where you can say this is what's causing the problems. And I suppose that's the big difficulty. So is there anything you can say to me other than tell me to shut up and go away? That is there anything else we can do to help these youngsters, to keep them in school and keep them educated and involved in what's going on and all that type of thing? Thanks, folks.
Stephen or Linda?
I can certainly take the point on exclusions. Thank you for raising that, and thank you for noting that exclusions have reduced, not just for looked after children, but actually for all children based on the same period last year, which is obviously very positive. One thing I would note is that we continue to work really closely with other services to identify ways of looking at the lack exclusion data and then what we can then do with that. So, for example, our looked after support officers who are part of the care experience team are engaging with looked after young people to identify ways of reducing the risk of exclusion from school. So it's about looking at what potentially causes that to be a risk and how can we work with them to obviously reduce that. We also are looking at identifying patterns of exclusion, whether it's particular schools, particular year groups, particular times of year, so that we can obviously put in place particular interventions or strategies to address that. Just on a wider point around exclusion, though, we are in the process of updating our exclusion policy and procedures. We're working closely with head teachers, legal services, and hoping to work with some young people on that as well. The updated policy will aim to strengthen the position on looked after exclusions in that schools need to engage with officers in education and social work before even considering an exclusion of a looked after child. So we're taking that very, very seriously, but it's good to note that the exclusions are down by about a quarter on the same period last year.
Thanks, Stephen. David?
Okay. Sorry, if I could just add.
Yep.
I seem to have people. If I could just add to that, generally, we are looking at the LAC data, and as Stephen highlights, we need to know more about the specific groups. So although Councillor McKee has mentioned looked after young people and the challenge of meeting their needs in schools, many looked after young people go to school and fit in and achieve. We know that there are specific groups within that where there's more of a challenge. So we know that our looked after young people who are looked after at home, we're seeing more challenges in that situation in terms of attendance and exclusions. We also know that there are a few looked after at home young people who have more than one exclusion. And part of our, a key function of our group as we move forward is to engage with those young people to find out more about their specific barriers. This fits in with the independent care review and the promise, which highlights as one of the 5 foundations, voice. And that's been something that I think we've been developing over the last couple of years, but something we really need to be mindful of just now.
Thanks, Linda.
I'm pleased to hear that you work with along with social work as well, because it's a broad spectrum, isn't it? Thank you for your report anyway.
And I've got Jim McComb. Jim?
Thank you, Chair. I note in the report you are hoping to redeploy resources to Nithsdale and Annandale and Eskdale. Is it not also the case that the Wigtownshire share of LEAC pupils is in excess of Wigtonshire's overall share of population?
Yes, certainly. What we're aiming to do, Councillor, is to ensure that where we deploy staff is based on where we have that degree of number of looked after children. So we obviously want to make sure with limited resources that everybody has, we want to make sure that it's deployed in the correct places based on the numbers. It is more than just that. We've obviously highlighted in the report that we will have to look closely at the areas with the highest numbers of looked after children, but it is more than that. It's about looking at those that also are in need of that additional support. As Linda's highlighted, many looked after young people are in school, they're achieving, they're attending, they're not being excluded, they feel safe and part of the community, but some aren't. So a big part of this is making sure that we also engage with them so that we're clear on where we need to deploy resources. That may be Wigtownshire, that may be Nithsdale, Annandale and Eskdale or Stewartry, we don't know. It's very much about engaging with the young people and schools to make sure that we're deploying our resources effectively.
Thank you. And also, Chair, on page 112, it is noticeable that the poorest attendance rate for looked after children at home is Wigtownshire.
If I could just take that point, please.
Yeah,
we're working, we have within our LAC Reason Attainment group, we have a subgroup specifically looking at attendance, and social work are a key part of that group. We've started to have a closer look at the data, so we've known for some time that the LAC at home attendance is poorer and in specific areas. So we've recently, just in the last few days, we've drilled down a little bit further into the February attendance data, or the running attendance until the end of February. So from that, we looked more closely at 16 looked after young people, LAC at home young people. And we've started to look at what are their reasons for not going to school. So one of the issues that's come out from that is that there were about a quarter of them identified issues at home and in the community. One was a physical illness, but nearly 3/4 of these young people identified mental health issues such as anxiety, bereavement, peer issues and so on as the reason that they're not going to school. So as we're gathering this data, that allows us to ensure that the interventions we're putting in place are targeted and in partnership with the Mental Health Schools Group and our colleagues in social work and health.
Thanks, Linda.
Thanks, Linda.
Thanks, Stephen.
Jim Brown, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Stephen and Linda. Just to give on that previous question a little bit of context, because I think it is important. I understand the point you made about the graphs in the document. We're talking in the order of 300 young people in the overall looked after category, 100 of whom are currently looked after at home. And I think it's if we're considering the statistics that Linda just gave, we always need to, I think, be very mindful of the fact that with a very small sample size, a statistic can appear to be significant, but then you look at the actual numbers involved, and because they're small numbers, it doesn't actually indicate any sort of significant difference. What we do in those cases is we look at trends, because we'll never get the significance because the numbers are not great enough. And we look at trends to see whether we have got a pattern which then justifies the allocation of a particular strategy. Not necessarily a resource, because it's not always about resource, it's about the strategies. And I say that particularly because as we're dealing with, not the, if you like, the 10,000 young people Gillian talked about going back to primary and the 10,000 going back to secondary, we're talking about absolute granular policy here, strategy here. Each of these young people has a specific need which we are addressing in specific ways in localities. So I really appreciate the point you make about Wigtonshire and the fact that you're obviously very aware of the detail in your local area. And if I can just absolutely reassure you that we are aware of these differences, and it's about those patterns as to where we need to put the individual strategies to meet the particular local need.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks for that. Yep.
Okay. Stephen Thompson. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks again, Chair. It's actually, it's sort of on reflection, because we've passed agenda item 5 now, and in there, the indicator for exclusion rates for looked after children is sort of, for this sort of half year period, showing a kind of green symbol, and the sort of previous period was red, obviously, and maybe that's sort of brought this report to us. But on the basis of item 5, you'd think, oh well, things are in hand. However, it's actually when we get to this level of granular detail and local nuances, if you like, that we can actually understand the specific or more specific and local factors that are either an underlying cause or a potential solution in terms of working together or whatever. So I'm wondering how meaningful the measurement item in item 5 is. Sorry, sort of muddling my words here, but if that indicator is really telling us what we need to know, because based on today's report, it's saying it's green, but this report here is actually saying, no, there's actually a whole underlying story to this. So how do we square that narrative?
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. If I can take that, Chair.
Yep. Go ahead.
In the last week, I've spoken both to the area reporter as well as the lead on social work regarding our looked after data, how it compares across Scotland, as well as the detail within our own data as to why, for example, we've got different factors in there, looked after at home, looked after in foster care, kinship care, and so on and so forth. We've got different categories. And so actually, whilst it's a very small number of youngsters, as we're all aware, these are incredibly important stories to understand the very specific details of. So I think, Councillor Thompson, there is perhaps a conversation that we need to have down the line to give you an idea of how we look at each individual strands of this and why it is perhaps that our data looks at it as it does. We focused today on looked after at home, but of course that's only one of the aspects of looked after youngsters. And the reason our looked after picture is as it is because of decisions and policies that are made, for example, with our colleagues in social work, with our colleagues in the police, in the NHS, and in the reporting service. So there is a sort of wider picture, and I absolutely accept your point. That then plays into this idea of what is the meaningful target that we should be using against which we measure success or otherwise. And I think that's the critical point, isn't it? That we need to make sure the targets we're setting have got a valid rationale as to why we think if we've met that target, we can now say we're doing what we need to be doing. So I think we probably do need to revisit this.
Thank you, Stephen. That's helpful.
Okay, so I don't seem to have anybody else wanting to come in. So can we move to the recommendations? Can 2.1 note the ongoing work being done by a care experience education team as outlined in paragraphs 3.1 to 3.5.
Noted.
2.2 note the key messages from the current data in relation to looked after children within education and how teams within supporting learners are responding to the data as described in paragraphs 3.6 to 3.9.
Noted.
And 2.3 agree to receive a further report in October 2021 with the latest data report and an update on the work of the care experienced education team as explained in paragraphs 3.10 to 3.12.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. So if we move to agenda item 9.
Sorry, Chair, I might have been slow with my hand.
Oh, sorry.
It was just, sorry, Stephen Thompson here.
Oh, Stephen.
It was just on that very last one and what Jim Byrne had been saying there.
Yeah.
Is that something you could maybe tease detail that you were discussing in your previous story, Chair?
You dropped out there. Can you repeat the last sentence?
It was just to maybe capture that additional conversation or exploration of how we meaningfully report in future.
Chair, can I pick that up? Thank you. Absolutely, Councillor Thompson. I think that's within the further report in October. I think we will absolutely perhaps describe in what you describe granular detail, a little bit more detail about that overall group of young people and particularly why it is in that case that we are choosing certain thresholds as giving a meaningful description of success, and whether that success is as part of a journey, if you like, or whether that success is a final position. But I think, yes, we'll absolutely bring to you more information on that particular narrative. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Happy with that, Stephen?
Thanks very much, Chair.
Okay. Right, so moving on to agenda item 9 on page 125, transforming additional support for learning. The report provides members with an outline plan for transforming the delivery of additional support for primary teacher representative learning. This local plan reflects the national response to the review of additional support for learning undertaken by Angela Morgan in 2020 and begins to set out an ambitious programme of change that will address the fundamental challenges our learners with additional supports needs face. Key areas of improvement include a whole school approach to inclusion, realigning resources for universal and targeted support, all staff confidence and knowledge of additional support for learning, access to specialised support, rights-based learning and teaching. All provides a framework for this change, which will be populated with more detail over the coming weeks through consultation and engagement with all stakeholders, including a members' seminar. And I think we can add that as a recommendation when we come to it in due course. So, Jim, are you speaking to this?
Thank you, Chair. I believe Hugh Smith is speaking to this.
All right, Hugh.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have anything to add other than the opening statement that you've made. Thank you.
Thank you.
Available for questions.
Okay. Okay. So we'll throw it open to questions, members. Julie Irvin.
Thank you, Chair. I think this report is really welcome. As a primary teacher working in school where we do have recognised increasing numbers of children with additional needs, it's very difficult to access the additional services, and I know that that is one of the things within the report that we're looking at, being able to ensure primary teachers can access support as and when it's required for children, and it may be external agencies. I think that's going to be really tricky, though. We know we've got shortages of occupational therapists, speech and language therapists. So I'm just wondering how we're going to implement some of the plans within this report, bearing in mind that there are shortages of staff in specialised areas. So sometimes when you refer a child on, it can take a couple of years to actually get the initial assessments done and to get the feedback from that and the support the child needs in class. So I suppose that's my question here is, do you know, how are we going to ensure that we have a timeline so that when you refer children into a service, you're getting quicker feedback so that as a teacher, you don't feel you're floundering and failing a child?
You?
Thanks, Julie. I think that's an incredibly important point, and I think at the moment we struggle a bit with kind of expectations, thresholds, criteria, standards around timelines, and I think that's part of the conversation that we need to have within our service, but also with the service and through the Children's Services Executive Group about, you know, how do we prioritise our young people in terms of making sure that we've got some clarity about expectations, so that you're not referring into, sometimes I'm feeling it can feel a bit like a bit of a black hole, not sure when actually you're going to get that response. So I guess it is about tightening up. It's not going to be easy. We know that our colleagues in health, particularly, you know, in terms of their capacity, the specialist nursing staff are very difficult and challenging. But I guess that it's that whole approach. This is, you know, the scope for this transformation agenda just gets bigger and bigger every conversation that we have, I think, in terms of the bringing in all partners. But it is, you know, it's part of the Children's Services Plan. This is about best outcomes for all children. So I totally get your point. It's about those difficult conversations with our partners in other agencies and services and being clear about those pathways for access to support.
Okay, Julie. Okay. Don't seem to have anybody else wishing to speak. Pauline.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for letting me come in. Hugh and Jim, I'm going to use this as an opportunity and also a question to you both. I worked for a while with some children, I'm not qualified, in a school project at Castle Douglas, which was, I hope, really successful. And some of the children had some additional needs. So we worked alongside people within the community and made these children feel much more part of what was going on in the bigger world. So no external agencies at all were required, and we just involved them in activities across the area and the region. So I've seen this happen really successfully at Kirkcudbright Academy. I know you'll know about this, Jim and Hugh, whereby the PTA got involved with the council and we all went and planted the whole of Kirkcudbright last summer with plants during COVID, carefully distanced apart. So it's a really, really good programme. And I would really like your comments and feedback as to how we're going to take this forward, because it's simple, it's free, and there is a little bit of requirement from the schools to commit. I've actually already spoken to the head of Castle Douglas, assistant head, and she too thinks it's a great idea. So, for example, I think we've spoken about this, Jim, including them in litter picking in their own playgrounds, you know, once a week, two children, planting out within the village, and also incorporating the elderly. The elderly can teach our children a lot, especially children with special needs. So if you could just assure me that that will happen going forward in Dumfries and Galloway, because it's an opportunity that we often miss out on because we are very busy. And I know Julie's discussed that. It is really important to include agencies, but we can also use our own communities. And I would just like to have confirmation that you'll do that going forward. Thanks, Chair, for letting me in.
Okay, Jim, Hugh.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, Hugh, and maybe you can jump in as well afterwards. Thank you. Yes, we have discussed that, haven't we, Councillor Drysdale? And you're absolutely right. There are these phenomenal examples of good practice locally. And I think what we have is very much what we talked about earlier. You know, we have a standard service within which we've got different communities who need also to articulate their own needs through their schools and then meet those needs in very bespoke ways in some cases. And your examples are a lovely one, which I'm sure many other schools would like to learn from and understand how, you know, the logistics of how that took place. I think in terms of this piece of work, and this answers your question, this is about meeting the needs of every young person. irrespective of who they are and how we might describe them. And so, for example, the strategy you've described there, Councillor Drysdale, will have very specifically met certain young people's needs, perhaps in a way that weren't being met in other ways. So what I can assure you is that what this piece of work is doing is looking at the fullest range of options, what we in fact call the curriculum. The curriculum is not a range of subjects, it's the totality of the child's experience, both in and out of the school. So we need to look at the curriculum, and we need to look at the young people, all of our young people, and we need to say, how does the curriculum that we have control of meet the needs of every one of these young people? And when I say curriculum, I'm also talking about the work that Stephen and Linda talked about. I'm also talking about the relationships between our teaching and non-teaching staff and our young people. It's the totality of that experience of young people in and out of school, and how it is that we can shape that so every child's needs are met. And I absolutely welcome the piece of work you've done. Absolutely agree, that was an outstanding example of excellent community partnerships.
Okay, Pauline.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Jim.
I've got Robert McQuiston. Robert.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask you, given the range of practitioners potentially involved in the support of young people, who would be responsible for the coordination and management of this support and all information relating to pupils' welfare? Thank you, Hugh.
Thanks, Robert. You know, in Dumfries and Galloway, we still follow the national practice model, which is the Getting It Right for Every Child practice model. Still fundamental in terms of the national approach in terms of how we support children and children's wellbeing and welfare. So it would be through the named person within an education, and then if we are escalating planning requirements, that would be through a lead professional. The professional would generally be identified as the person that has the best and most appropriate working relationship in terms of the areas of focus of need for that young person. So that could be from education, health, social work, or others. And then, of course, if we escalate into looked after, then you have a more formal process in terms of that would be the social work. So we have a very staged approach. It fits with the national practice model. It's been very successful in Dumfries and Galloway, and that will be how we will continue to do that.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I take that point. Sorry, Chair. I take that point. I'm just thinking within the school context, a lot of information comes from other teachers, from whoever, and it's important that the school themselves have a focus of that information, just to avoid a loss of information and a loss of support. But I take your general point that it's a graphic response.
Okay, thank you. So I don't appear to have anybody else looking to speak, so can we move to the recommendations? Can we 2.1 note the key issues associated with the additional support for learning and consider the contents of the plan? We've done that.
Noted.
And we 2.2 agree the programme of activities is set out in the plan in the appendix.
Agreed.
2.3 agree to receive further reports to this committee on the progress of the plan on a 3-monthly rotation.
Agreed.
And I think we agreed to add in a further recommendation to agree a members' seminar so that elected members can feed into the process as well. Everybody happy with that? I'll take we agreed in that case. Okay, thanks, Hugh. Okay, so if we move on to
sorry, Jeff. I thought I'd raised my hand earlier on, but it disappeared, so I didn't bother.
Can't see it.
But no, it's all right. Don't worry about it. I take it these people, the people who give these kids the support and whatnot, they're trained specifically for that. It's no an add-on training for the likes of teachers and whatnot to provide the support to these youngsters or to help them to work with them.
Jim, Hugh?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a mixture. Every member of the education service has a responsibility in terms of the education, learning and teaching responsibilities and support for all children. But we then have specialist staff, and that can range from a learning assistant who will have done some key focus training around autism or other specific programs, but very kind of at a general level, to very specialist, as we heard from Linda Bigger earlier, principal educational psychologist, through to an educational psychologist. So we have staff at a range of different levels with different responsibilities and different focus, and working alongside the core teaching staff.
Okay, I suppose the daft boy question is, could we do a grow your own? Then I bother answering that. I'll speak to you again. Thanks very much, Chair.
Can I just say that we do? Can I just say that we do very much? Most of our, all of our staff are coming through systems and processes that we already have in place. Not a formal grow your own process, but actually, absolutely. I think back to the summer activity scheme, which was working with young people with very complex needs. A number of those young people that came through that scheme in terms of as volunteer or paid volunteers are actually now teachers in our schools. So we do have systems and processes where we give young people and others the opportunity to develop an interest and experience in working with children, young people with additional support needs. And that does trigger for them they've come in the first place because they want to get involved, and that can trigger lots of different pathways. I think it would be a good point, and the councillor makes, in terms of that we should look to try and reinforce those pathways to make sure that we can give folk as the best opportunity to progress in the field of additional support as far as they can.
That's great. Thanks very much for that. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Ed. Right, so if we move on to agenda item 10 on page 137, transformation update, partnerships and school management arrangements. This report presents members with an update of the progress that education and learning have made following the outcomes from the Council's transformation theme on school models, and is agreed by Education and Learning Committee in November 2020. Members will be aware that the Council undertook to partner all schools of less than 150 pupils in 2012 for the reasons outlined in 3.2 of the report. This was known as the Cluster Working Review. Since that time, a number of changes have occurred to our schools. We've seen fluctuating school roles. Some schools have closed or been mothballed. We've introduced 1,140 hours of free early learning and childcare, and we have seen the increased expectation on schools from the Scottish Government's Empowering Schools agenda. We know the change is now the norm in our society. Officers have managed the changes over the time since the Cluster Working Review was implemented. This has presented challenges to ensure consistency and equity, with often bespoke arrangements being made. The paper presented to members seeks agreement for a guiding set of principles to be implemented to ensure fairness and consistency of approach to how we manage our schools. We know that the Council's transformation programme is likely to bring about further changes as to how we run our services. The framework described in Appendix 2 ensures that we are in the best position to support our schools through these changes, and ensures that our schools are always managed appropriately. And we have John Thin to speak to this, and I think you want to give us sort of an overview of what's intended, John. John?
Thank you, Councillor Lever and members. Just to sort of almost reiterate what Jeff has just gone through, just to give you almost that history lesson to start with regards to the sort of genesis of this paper, because it isn't a new paper, it's a progressive paper. It's building on previous work that's gone on, and certainly part of that previous work was the Cluster Working Review, which was transformational in its time and continues to be transformational and is looked upon with envy across many of our other local authority colleagues. Often asked for information about how do you do this, and of course we invested a considerable amount of time, effort and energy to try and make sure we got it as right as we possibly could. And it was a very productive programme, and it has allowed us to continue to recruit to our head teacher positions, which many other local authorities really struggle with in terms of the amount of head teachers we have, but having that wider strategic overview, clearly creating that space for being a head teacher rather than class committed head teacher. And obviously with the eye on that things were changing through the empowerment agenda, and obviously through things like, activities like the implementation of 1,140 hours for early learning and childcare. So I hope members see this as a progressive paper, and a paper that links a lot of the work that we've been doing together. We spent a lot of time, based on the November committee decision, to ask for that update, the review of the primary school partnership arrangements being progressed, and felt as a service that actually, as soon as you pick it out in terms of any particular schools that perhaps aren't following the criteria and aren't within the partnership, and indeed are the partnerships the right partnerships, as soon as you do that, it becomes the spider's web. And in essence, what happens is it moves across the wider council, it moves across the other parts of the region, if you like. So therefore, the paper is proposing that we pull together, in the appendix number 2, that we pull together a template, if you like, that we can impose and sort of almost have that overview, so that we're looking at every school under the same microscope. And that allows us to then have a objective view rather than a subjective view about the partnership arrangements. Obviously, COVID has created a bit of a challenge in terms of the pace of bringing a paper like this to committee. Certainly, we have engaged with some of our head teachers, in particular those head teachers involved as head teachers of triple schools, because part of the challenges that we've noticed over the piece has been that head teachers of triple schools having 3 sets of different expectations, 3 sets of aims for different schools, 3 very different contexts that many of our head teachers are working in is extremely challenging. And we'd want to see this paper as a support for our head teachers as well, making sure the job's doable in essence, which perhaps, you know, I'm not saying that our head teachers haven't done a fantastic job, a magnificent job being able to pull those things together. It does take its toll. We also know, as Councillor Lever highlighted, that our demographics are changing. And again, we're hoping as we move forward, we've already seen significant changes in our school estate since the cluster working review. We've seen the closure of Mousselt, for example. We've seen the mothballing of Cursfairn. And that has meant that we've made fairly bespoke arrangements. We haven't really had a systems approach to trying to look at those schools. And so therefore, we've looked at it individually through a particular lens without having that wider opportunity to consider what are the implications of that across the school estate. And really, I suppose, just to conclude before I invite any questions, it is a future-looking paper. It is about looking at what transformation might bring to the table. We know that we have to look differently at how we deliver our services. And this isn't just about looking at our services being delivered from education. This has to be about looking at our services being delivered across our communities, straddling our communities potentially in terms of making best use of the resources we've got available. And I believe that this paper helps us to find that sort of next step, if you like, to allow that to happen. Our schools won't just be schools for children in the future, I don't think. I think some of our schools have to open their doors for wider delivery of services. And again, this paper starts to pave the way for some of that work. We need to look at our catchments. We know that some of our catchments are significantly depopulated. That will change after COVID, potentially. And we know that some of our catchments are extremely heavily populated and are increasingly going to be like that. And again, I think this paper allows us the opportunity to be able to react and move and adapt the service rather than have to go through if you like, that world of pain of having those very localised conversations, which we'll have through an engagement process, absolutely. And we'll bring that engagement back to members in May, and we'll actually bring back what that toolkit will do and what that will look like for members in May. This isn't about providing the answers just now. This is about asking the questions, and then we'll bring it back to members in May what that might look like and have that conversation with members at that point. So I'll stop there, Councillor Lever, and certainly invite any questions that members might have.
Thanks, John. Members, I've got John Young and Elaine Murray so far. So John Young.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, John, for that very full introduction. As you touched on, a further paper mentioned in recommendation 2.4 is coming forward in May. Will some of the existing partnerships or cluster arrangements presently shown in Appendix 2 be reassessed to align with the latest council priorities, such as minimising unnecessary travel? And furthermore, could I ask who will be consulted regarding possible cluster or new cluster or partnership arrangements? Thank you, John.
Thank you. Absolutely, Councillor Young, and I think that was certainly one of the fundamentals that we needed to look at. We do have some of our partnership schools that are quite far apart, and I think one of the challenges we had when the Cluster Working Review was implemented in 2012-13 was that we very much focused on the fact that they were in the same cluster. Now we know that transition happens all the time. Our young people are used to transitioning, and our schools are used to having the young people transitioning. Again, with increase in 1140, our schools are very comfortable now with working with partner providers, part of the PVI sector, with different local authority nurseries, and bringing the children in from a variety of settings. And likewise, our children go where their parents tell them, pretty much, but the children go in different directions to their secondary schools, and we have to be adaptable enough to accept that that's the case. And when Cluster Working Review was written in the first time, it was very much focused on the localised school. It was very much, this is your secondary school. It was very much tied into that. But actually that created some false ceilings, if you like, or false floors. I'm not quite sure which one to describe it as, but it created false boundaries. And actually that perhaps wasn't the most sensible option in terms of moving forward. In the longer term, I think at the time it was absolutely right, and I would not criticise at all any of the work. I think it's a phenomenal piece of work, but actually it was in its time, and transition work has moved forward, and so therefore that reflects on that. Second part of your question, sorry, Councillor Young, it's just gone straight out of my head.
John?
Thanks for that, John. Second
consultation, it's just come back.
Consulted regarding new cluster arrangement.
Thank you very much for that. So I suppose for me, the consultation question is a really difficult one, because my question would go back to members is, what are we consulting on? Are we consulting on the fact that we should have our schools partnered? Well, actually, that consultation has probably already happened, and it has happened in 2012-13. We consulted on the partnerships and whether we should have schools partnered. Now, we know that we don't have all of our schools partnered that fitted within that criteria. And so therefore, again, we've make done and mended. We've found solutions to problems as we've gone along, but that doesn't provide equity. That doesn't provide fairness. That doesn't provide that that single approach across our schools. And so therefore we have created, through nobody's fault really, but we've created an inequitable situation. I'll give you the example. Mousel closed, and therefore we had a problem because we didn't know what to do with Cullen. And so therefore officers had nowhere to go, no policy to fall back on to say, well, actually, we've now got a trigger, as we've called them in the policy, or the framework. So it's not a policy, it's a framework. We've got nowhere to go now about Cullens. What do we do? So of course we engage with the Parent Council, and we talk to the Parent Council about what would that look like, what would they look to what would that mean for them? And of course we explored, well, are there other partnerships? Should we be bunging, and I hate to use that phrase, but are we bunging Cullen into another partnership? Just because we've got Cullen sitting on its own, and it didn't feel right. It didn't feel the right thing to do. So we created a single standalone school. But of course, other schools that are partnered are going, well, why did Cullen not have to be partnered? And I don't like that phraseology, because partnering is actually a really positive approach for our schools. But that created inequity. So I think we have to be really careful on the consultation word. I think the consultation's been and done and gone. We can have the conversations at a local level about engaging our parents and our staff and our school communities about the most appropriate partnership. But ultimately, officers have to have the ability to be able to make that decision, because if we can't make that decision, then we'll create further inequity across the service. Because if, for example, a school that's not partnered says, actually, I don't want to go to that school. We don't want to get partnered in the first instance. Okay, that's a different conversation. Second part of the consultation is, who would you like to be partnered with? Well, you might have 10 different views on that. But actually, if we've got a set of criteria, we say, well, that's where it fits. That actually will impact X, Y, and Z. But it's the same for everybody. So we can utilise that criteria to ensure that the partnership's appropriate. And the engagement process we'll have with the school community, the Parent Council, the staff, and indeed the young people, will be about preparing them for that change in management arrangement. Because I always say, the partnering arrangements, the real positive for the partnering arrangements has, well, two really, is to create space for head teachers to be head teachers. But the second aspect is it creates consistency for the young people in the classroom. Whereas beforehand, when a head teacher moved, it was the teacher and the head teacher that was moving to another school. But actually, that provides consistency for the learners. And fundamentally, that's the most important thing that we're about. How we manage that is, it is the local authority's decision. But ultimately, we don't want a change in terms of who's in front of the children. And that's the bit that the children are resilient for their head teacher, but they're less resilient for their class teacher in their primary two, and they're used to that class teacher being there for the last couple of years. So I think we've got to be careful of the word consultation, and I would rather use the phrase engagement with our communities about what that partnering would look like.
Thanks, John. Okay, John.
Can I come back very quickly? So basically, John, what you're saying is the education authority, in other words, education officers like yourself, will decide which schools will form partnerships, and then they'll explain their decision to all other parties who are affected by it.
So the decision will be through the framework. So it won't be John Thin decided that this is a good partnership. This will be through a framework, and the framework, which is described in Appendix 2, will be applied across all of our schools, and that will give us the security, if you like, the benchmark to allow us to then make those decisions. And whether that decision has to be made immediately because there's a timescale involved, or whether that's a decision we can look at as the next change happens. It's just to provide us with that framework, which we don't currently have.
Thank you, John. I appreciate your full answer. Thank you.
Okay, John. I've got Elaine Murray, Jim McComb and Julie Irvin. So, Elaine?
Yeah, thanks. I know what you were saying about that you're going to bring another paper back about the engagement process, because I think one of the things which will worry people a little about Appendix 2 is the description of the engagement process just sounds like people being told what's going to happen to them. And unless there is a good engagement in terms of bringing an understanding of how the framework has been arrived at, it will feel both to elected members and school parent councils that somebody's taken a decision and that's that, you know, that none of us have been involved in creating this. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about what's going to come back in May, and maybe just reassure members that this isn't just going to be something which we're told is happening and we don't really have any input either as communities or as elected members in terms of actually deciding how the framework, you know, what is in the framework. Thanks.
John?
Thanks, Councillor Murray. And I suppose that is the crux of the question, isn't it? Because ultimately, I think everybody's probably looking to the last line in this to say, well, what does that actually mean for my school? What does that mean for my community? And ultimately, what I've deliberately not done is I've not done that piece of work. Because as soon as you do that piece of work, it becomes a bit more, I suppose it becomes a little bit more parochial. Apologies for using that word, but it becomes about the school rather than the system. And this is to try and develop a systems-wide approach, which means that we're not doing that, almost that subjective view on schools and how that goes forward. That will absolutely be brought back to committee in May once we've imposed it, if you like, and done the piece of work. I've called it in the past the sausage machine, and I do apologise for that, but it's almost like we need to run everybody through the computer to see what comes out at the other side and then present to members what that would look like. Now, there may be very good reasons that actually what that looks like isn't appropriate, isn't accepted by members, and we would certainly have that conversation at committee in May. But ultimately, there has to be some sort of equitable framework to allow us to work through that process. And at the moment, we don't have that. And this is what basically I'm asking members permission to be able to do that, and we'll bring that information back to members. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but for me, what you've highlighted is absolutely the crux of the question, which is about that engagement and what does that mean for a local community who may or may not be happy, because we know that some communities are not happy about potentially moving into a partnership arrangement because they're happy with what they've got. But ultimately, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, we probably should have done something more with those communities and worked them into that partnership arrangement. Whether it was the right partnership or the wrong partnership, that's almost a moot point at the moment. But this is something we should have probably done more a few years ago, and we've not done that. And this paper's trying to redress some of that work that wasn't done. So I'm sorry, Councillor Murray, I probably didn't answer all of your questions. So do you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, I think really in terms of developing what's coming back to us in May, how will the school communities be involved in that? Because I don't, you know, it could be quite counterproductive if this just looks like something that's been decided by officers and elected members and school communities haven't had any say in how this framework is developed. So I just wondered what sort of engagement there will be before me with school communities in terms of getting them to understand the process and how the framework has been developed.
So I suppose for me, my first port of call will be our other senior officers who are in our schools, which are our head teachers. And I would certainly want to work with our head teachers early in the new term. I realise time's very much of the essence on this one. And actually, if we don't get agreement in May, nothing's broken. I'm a bit of a believer that nothing's broken, and we can fix things and we can put temporary arrangements in place until we get that sort of firmness of the process. And the engagement will be through the head teachers in the first instance and then through the parent councils. So we will absolutely engage with them. But I have to go back to the point is we cannot consult with them, because if we go through a full consultation on this again, which has already been done, as I said before, in 2012-13, we will get 1,000 different answers to what that might look like. And actually, the principles have to be the thing that drives it, not necessarily the individual schools' views about whether they should be partnered, which I'd mentioned before, or indeed who their partner should be.
Okay, Elaine?
Thank you.
Right. Okay, so I've got Jim McComb and Julie Irvin. Jim?
Thank you, Chair. John, I assume these arrangements relate to partnership schools only and to existing promoted staff. Is that correct?
No, thanks, Councillor McComb. Not necessarily. And you'll notice in one of the bullet points, it was a sort of request that we move the threshold to 100, because again, you'll recall, many of you will recall the first time round, if you like, when this was implemented, excuse me, we had a number of schools that sat on a cusp, if you like, or, you know, the 150 was the sort of line. And then in 2016, we updated that to say, well, actually, we need a percentage either side of that, because as soon as you hit 150 pupils, then you're either in the partnership review or you're not in the partnership review. And to me, that seemed it was a difficult one to fathom, because you could predict population growth, and would you take a school out of a partnership arrangement, but knowing 2 years down the line that school roll would drop again. So what I've suggested in the paper, in the appendix, is that actually that threshold's 100, and it's 100 across the 100 pupils, which includes the ELC children as well, because of the increased demand of the 1140, to allow that threshold to be changed somewhat. But it will mean that some schools will get scooped up, if you like, slightly differently, and will looked at with a different lens. But again, this process allows us to look at everybody at the same time. And it's almost like, again, using that phraseology, you know, the machine that we're putting, I'm not going to say the sausage machine this time, the machine that allows us to look at through the lens of the machine, it tells us what that information looks like at the end of it. And then some may or may not, because populations have changed over the piece. We know that. We know that some schools have increased exponentially since 2013, and some have decreased to the extent that they're no longer with us. So this allows us to then have that trigger point to say, well, actually, and I think it's really important, the final bullet point, sorry, just jumped a little bit there, but I think it's really important that we review this policy annually, or process, I keep using the word policy, it's a process annually, the framework annually, and link it to our school capacities, because we need to keep an eye on both those things at the same time, so that we don't leave ourselves exposed to not being able to make a decision because something's changed.
Thanks, John. Okay, Jim?
Just to come back. Elected members will be involved in this process.
Absolutely. I would certainly want to engage both at a group opportunity, if I can, with various groups, and I'd also like to engage, we will engage with elected members following, I would imagine, agreements at the Education and Learning Committee in May, but we'll absolutely engage with elected members as part of that engagement process at a local level.
Thanks, John.
Okay. So, Julie Irvin.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. The first one is to do with 3.6 in the current position. Obviously, we are able to get head teachers to our partnerships, but I'm just wondering what the turnover rate is to a partnership school compared to single headship. I'm aware in my own local area, we've had 3 head teachers in the space of 7 years. So that doesn't really help with the continuity of education. And I'm just wondering what the turnover generally is. And my second question is to do with 4.3 in the principles. And that first bit about the empowerment agenda impact. I note it says the combined roles of individual schools, which include the nursery, should not exceed 100. So that would put rather a lot of schools that are already partnered up for review to be removed from partnership. Is that your intention?
John?
Yeah, thanks, Julian, and two very, very good questions, actually. So the first one, I agree. We have seen a significant number of turnover of head teachers, but we've not just seen that within our smaller schools, I have to be honest. I think we always had an eye on, and we've got a workforce strategy that sits behind a lot of this work, which tells us our demographics for our age profile, if you like, for our head teachers and our deputies and our principal teachers, our class teachers, etc. We've got quite a wealth of information. And so this situation was predicted in terms of people moving into other positions. And I think two really important things for me. I think one is that what we've seen a number of principal teachers now being able to, because of the responsibility element they've had within their individual schools, being able to then, develop their leadership skills through some of the programmes that we're able to offer both locally and nationally, and therefore being able to assume the head teacher positions, which has been fantastic. And I thank all my colleagues for the work that they do in the background on that. And I think we've also seen that opportunity where small school head teachers, right, and I'm using that phrase quite loosely because that was the phrase we used to use, are much more confident now about taking on the larger scale establishments we have. For example, the Castle Douglases, the Lockerbays and whatever else. So we're seeing that actual, not to say churn, but that natural progression for staff to have that opportunity to continue to move into other positions. So for me, it's actually a really positive thing, but I absolutely understand that it does create an element of instability at a local level, but hopefully with that principal teacher opportunity and that teacher opportunity being the consistent and the mainstay of the school, that's allowed that stability at a local, for the class level, for the child level, to be maintained. So hopefully that responds to that one. And yeah, absolutely. I think with this new lens being shown on all schools, I think that will happen, Julie, in terms of some of the schools who perhaps are partnered may move out of that position. Now, again, we will engage with our communities because actually what we're trying to do is we're trying to create that space, we're trying to create that equity, we're trying to create that, the demand on the head teacher to be as equal as we possibly can. And that will allow some of those head teachers who perhaps, and I know your own situation, so I'm sure you've got a view on that, perhaps would be looked at differently in terms of, and I'm not saying it will because we haven't actually done the piece of work, but that might mean that some schools who are currently partnered might not be partnered in the future. And I know that for members that might be then, well, what's the cost implication of that? And again, we'll bring that back to the May committee if there is an implication in terms of any additional cost or potential reduction in cost, because we don't know because we haven't done the piece of work yet. Okay. Thank you.
So I don't have anybody else looking to speak, as far as I can see. So can we move to the recommendations? Members are asked to agree 2.1, the management arrangements of Dumfries and Galloway Schools Strategic Framework in Appendix 2.
Agreed.
2.2, that future appointments, allocations of senior management within schools are carried out by officers on the basis of the management arrangements of Dumfries and Galloway School Strategic Framework and within existing policies as set out in Appendix 2.
Agreed.
2.3, to a review of all school management arrangements and existing partnerships being carried out based upon the management arrangements of Dumfries and Galloway Schools Strategic Framework as set out in Appendix 2.
Agreed.
2.4, to receive a further report in May 2021 on the implementation of the management arrangements of Dumfries and Galloway Schools Strategic Framework as set out in Appendix 2.
Agreed.
And 2.5, to receive an annual update on school management arrangements as part of the school's capacities review. Agreed? I take we're in agreement.
Agreed.
Okay, thanks, John. Thank you, members. If we move on to item 11. On page 153. School session dates for 2022-23, 23-24 and 24-25. The school holiday and session dates is agreed by the LNCT and ratified by the Children, Young People and Learning Committee, Lifelong Learning Committee as it was, in May 2018 are set for 3 years in advance. Due to the impact that COVID has had on people's abilities to take their holidays, it was felt that the early setting of the forthcoming holiday period would be helpful for families. The pattern which is laid out follows the same principles as previously agreed, and these can be seen in 3.2 of the report. Following ratification, the dates will be shared on the Council's website for all stakeholders to view and plan around, and will be up until the end of the session 24-25. John, is there anything you want to add? I know there was a revised appendix sent out.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just really to apologise, excuse me, to members. It's a dry throat today. Apologise to members for the slight the change in amendment because that came back through the LNCT. So we'd picked up the older papers rather than the amended ones that had come through LNCT. And it's really just, again, it might seem a little bit strange looking this far ahead, but actually I think this is a really important piece of work because it does help and support families in terms of planning post-COVID. And the sooner we can get this information shared with families through the Dumgal website, the better, so that families can start to plan ahead in terms of the recovery phase as we move out of COVID. So nothing in terms of any changes to structure. Obviously, we went through a fairly extensive consultation exercise a few years ago, and really, it's reaffirming that they're still the basic principles that the LNCT are looking for. And hopefully, members will see that as a positive opportunity just to get those shared with the public so that we can get them out there and people can start to make their plans. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. Members, any questions? I'm not seeing anything, so can we move to the recommendations? 2.1, can we agree the school holiday and session dates and inset arrangement for sessions 22, 23, 23, 24, 24, 25 as detailed in appendices 1 to 3.
Agreed.
And 2.2, note the recommendation of the LNCT for the placement of the 40 days annual leave together with the balance of days within the school holiday period defined as school closure days for sessions 22, 23, 23, 24 and 24, 25.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Is that Julie? Julie, are you wanting in?
Yes, please. Sorry,
Yep.
I've just realised in the updated version we were given, it doesn't actually give the layout of the school closure days.
John?
Okay, I'm not sure why, Julie, but I can certainly circulate that. You know the difference that there's the 40 days and there's the 26 days of closures, and it's based on full weeks wherever possible, etc. So there's no material difference to the recommendations, but I can certainly get that sent round after the meeting. If it's not been, if it's not already been sent, I can do that.
It makes a difference for staff if they are unwell or off on maternity leave.
Correct.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, John. Okay, so that's recommendations done, and I've got no additional support. Sorry, additional support. I've got no additional business, so thanks very much. I see Tracy's posted we will append the updated docs to the minute. So I've got no additional business, so thanks very much for your attendance, members, and I see the sun's still shining in Dumfries at least, so thanks very much. Okay, bye.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.